The history of Cantha and Elona, as we know it, ceases around the time of Or's liberation from the sea. Little contact with these nations has made its way north to the Tyrian continent. The undead Or and the upheaval in the Crystal Desert made news scarce and difficult to acquire. In the year 1127 AE, Emperor Usoku, successor to Kisu, took a firm hold of his nation. He raised the Canthan military, spending millions in gold to arm his troops, and then swept the countryside. He defeated the Luxans and the Kurzik, incorporating these disparate humans back into his nation. Usoku unified Cantha behind a strong national identity and began to drive out all non-humans. His regime was ironclad, tyrannical, and fierce. Those Canthans who did not agree with the Emperor's dictates were given no choice but to leave their homeland, seeking refuge and sanctuary in Elona and Tyria. As a result, Cantha became extremely isolationist. Once Or rose from the ocean, those tendencies were reinforced by an inability to safely sail the western seas. Any ships venturing near the Strait of Malchor are sunk by the Black Ships, then dredged from the ocean floor by the Orient Dragon and commandeered into his service. Thus, completely cut off from Crita, Cantha vanishes entirely. Travelers, refugees, and even Zunlai agents residing within Tyria heard nothing more from Cantha. Sporadic sailors have washed ashore on the southern coast of the Maguma jungles, but that is the only evidence that Cantha even exists past the cataclysmic event that cut it off from Tyria. It can only be assumed that Usoku's successors continued his dictatorial isolationist rule, and that Cantha continues beneath the iron fist of the Emperor as ever. For years after the defeat of Aresh Osa and the fall of Abaddon, Elona was at peace. The Sun Spears spread across all three continents, attempting to fulfill their ancient purposes. But the peace they brought was not to last. In their campaign to end the threat of Aresh Osa, and stop Abaddon's final attempt to free himself from the prison of the gods, the Sun Spears also unleashed the architect of their own doom back upon the world, a monster who would bring about the next Dark Age. That monster's name was Palawa Joko. Within 60 years of Cormyr's rise to godhood, Palawa Joko mustered his former power and marched a new army of mummies, zombies, and other undead out of the Crystal Desert into war with Vabi. To ensure his dominance, Palawa dammed and diverted the river Elona, causing drought and famine amid the northern provinces of Elona and creating a green and growing area within the Crystal Desert. In this area, Palawa Joko established the seat of his new kingdom. The horrible famine caused by the diverted river caused widespread rebellion among the people of Vabi and northern Karna. Palawa Joko then found it all too easy to break the backs of the Elonian resistance. Vabi bowed to his strength simply to survive, and Korna and Easton both became vassal states. Palawa's price for benevolence was tribute, forced loyalty, and all those who bore the name Osa delivered unto his care. Periodically, a few more descendants were found hiding in the hills of Elona, and all were delivered into the undead ruler of Elona. From the descendants of his ancient enemy, Palawa created a living army to match his undead one, reveling in the irony that Osa's children owed their lives and their loyalty to him. Palawa also took great pride in the destruction of his greatest enemies, the Sun Spears. Broken, their strongholds destroyed, their members scattered to the winds, they stood as a force no longer in Elona. Eventually, most of the populace forgot about the Order and their heroic deeds. Those few Sunspears who survived passed on teachings of the Order over the course of more than 100 years, holding onto the tenets of a barely remembered vision. They became wandering mystics, philosophers, and lone warriors in a world that chose to forget their presence. All but a few. Some Sunspears, taken in by Palawa Joko's offers of power and rank, abandoned their vows. These traitors to the Order were given command of Palawa's armies, or allowed to work alone against those in Elona who had once scorned them. Each one, converted personally by Palawa, was given power over death, and sent to hunt down and destroy their fellow Sunspears, or bring them before their own lord to be drawn into their unholy cause. These knights, called the Morden Crescent, became a dark presence in the sunlit southern lands of Tyria. The Order still exists and has moved beyond the borders of Elona. The first to discover the awakening of the dragons, in or and elsewhere, the Order was aware that nobody would believe them. They chose instead to spread their members across Tyria, gaining as many converts as possible, and then slowly educating them about the real danger threatening all of the races of the world. They work with the Critons and the Escalonians, and even maintain a presence in Elona, although crossing the Crystal Desert is currently impossible due to Palawa's stranglehold over the southern reaches and the Desert Dragon's presence in the northern desert. Still, the Order of Whispers somehow manages to maintain communication with Elona, aiding its military in their fight against Palawa and his minions. The Order of Whispers also contributed to the continuation of human knowledge when Lion's Arch was flooded, threatening the great library within their city. The Order rescued thousands of ancient scrolls, books, and other historical artifacts, carrying them to a hidden monastery in the nearby Shiver Peaks. Stored far above the rising waters, these antiquities remain the only true records of the ancient age of humanity. The monks of that monastery are part historian and part warrior, studying and protecting their sacred charges. When the waters that inundated Lion's Arch after ore rose from the sea began to recede, the ruins of that once majestic city became a pirate stronghold. Those seagoing vessels driven off the Orient Island chain by the rise of the undead found safe haven in the ruins of Lion's Arch, and created a town neutral to all open races and ruled in a mercenary fashion. The battle isles flooded at the same time, decimating the temples. The priests of Balthazar scattered for a time, before also finding their way to Lion's Arch after the tides began to recede. They claim that they were called there by Balthazar, and the god did indeed open a massive portal within the city to the mists, where a great battle between worlds wages for his favor. With the fall of the battle isles, Lion's Arch became the guild home, a central point for the guilds of the world, as well as the conduit to the Heroes' Hall. This reading of The Movement of the World will continue on Monday.